Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And our guest today is Dan Kane, co-founder and co-CEO at ModMed. Welcome, Dan.
Hello, John. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on the program. You've been on the program. I mean, you were on the program before we knew what we were doing with video, but anyway, it's good to catch up again. And yeah, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and ModMed.
Sure. So I'm Dan Kane. I'm the now co-CEO and co-founder of ModMed. ModMed used to go by Modernizing Medicine, but after 15 years of doing this, we decided that it was just too many darn keys to type, and we're all about efficiency. So we'll just shorten the name to ModMed, and people will still know what it is we are doing. Modernizing Medicine, ModMed provides software to ambulatory surgical and medical specialties. We specialize in software for dermatologists, ophthalmologists, orthopedic surgeons, otolaryngologists, urologists, OBGYNs, and we are the #1 rated Black Book EHR in all 11 specialties that we serve. So take a very different approach than most other software companies where I don't envy the job in front of them. If you're an Epic or a Cerner and you've got to serve every specialty in a hospital setting, plus all of the other things like the pharmaceutical distribution and pharmacy and labs. I mean, that's a big job. The job becomes slightly more manageable if you try to do it one specialty at a time. And what we do is different than others in that we actually hire physicians. We teach them how to program. We had a revelation 15 years ago when I met my co-founder that no matter how much I tried, he was never going to be able to teach me dermatology. He's a practicing dermatologist, but I could teach him how to code. And fast forward to today, we have over 23 physicians on staff at Modernizing Medicine that program alongside our hundreds of other developers. And they are the ones that actually build the workflows, build the user interface, and then use it in their private practice to ensure that it works seamlessly.
Yeah. I mean, even from the first time I saw you demo it on this newfangled thing called an iPad, back then, you definitely had a different approach. And I think it's interesting you called it modernizing medicine. That was your goal. I remember you saying my goal is to modernize medicine. But talk to us about how your work at ModMed has evolved from the vision you had when you first started to the company to today.
So we've been on a journey. We started off with a single product in a single specialty, and even back then, people said it's not enough. You can't be a specialty EHR. That's one piece of a bigger ecosystem, and they weren't wrong. We couldn't remain that forever. We had to grow into becoming a world-class practice management system. We had to become patient engagement and telemedicine and inventory management and pathology and image management and all the things a practice needed to be able to find patients, recruit patients, schedule patients, see them clinically, do all the prescriptions and labs and all the other things that happen inside of a practice, and then bill and collect. So today we do all of those things, and we're a full payment processing company, and we do a full revenue cycle management for those that elect to outsource their billing to us and entrust us with collecting on their patient reimbursement. And so we're a true end-to-end system, but we came out at just the right time. And when Michael met me, he had a vision for something that was impossible. He wanted it to be a touch-based adaptive learning system that was in the cloud. 15 years ago, the Amazon cloud was one or two of their services. It's nothing like it is today. The iPad was just about to be invented, and AI was something that we would chuckle at and say, you mean probability and statistics, that what they did the last few times when they prescribe for that disease, they'll likely do it the next few times. And he's like, good enough to start. But fast forward 15 years, the cloud is incredibly powerful. I would say that it's far more powerful than anything you could imagine on-prem or as a client server application. It's got more scalability, reliability, and security. If you fast forward to today, the iPad is one of the most powerful devices out there. It now gives you true all-day computing. And the touch-based system we came up with was at the time revolutionary. Now I see that the doctors use it and they are facing their patients. They are including the patients in their interactions. They're never turning their back and typing on a keyboard or doing dot phrases or macros. And so it's an entire game changer in how people interact with the technology. And then finally, AI, with the advent of modern graphics processing units and the newest algorithms, the AI has finally arrived to the point at which we can use all of the data we've been gathering for the last 15 years and turn that data into something incredibly powerful.
Well, that's where we want to focus today, although I want to get to the idea of UI and AI as well. But let's talk about AI. What are you hearing from your customers when it comes to AI?
So two things I'm hearing very clearly. One, they do not need AI to out-doctor a doctor. I am not getting requests from our users to say, hey, you've got millions of pictures of cancer. Would you be able to build something that can detect cancer for us? Because no one's asking me for that. And frankly, that's something that doctors, that's what they're trained to do. So we're
That's
not
the
trying
fun
to,
part of their job.
I'm not trying to out-doctor a doctor. That's why they went to med school. That's why they've been in residency. That's why they're practicing. So we focus our AI on solving the operational issues, the overhead of healthcare. So ballpark it, right? $4 trillion US healthcare spend, about $1 trillion of it is overhead, is waste. We are focused relentlessly on taking that waste out, on streamlining solutions so that everything from having chat conversations with patients and realizing that just trying to reschedule an appointment. Well, here's our self-scheduling application. Or I have a billing related question. Well, the AI can look at the bill and help answer questions based on that. You don't need a person to be able to do those things. The one we just are releasing now, as a matter of fact, it's in our EA, is a system that automates all of the inbound faxes. It takes the inbound fax, it reads it, it extracts the correct patient information, and it classifies that fax into one of the different buckets that the practice has set up. Now, that may seem like, so what? It turns out, as you probably know, and probably your viewers also know, still a lot of faxing going on in healthcare. And some of these practices have teams of people that do nothing but read, classify, and attribute to where the fax is supposed to go, assign it to the patient. And AI is incredibly good at learning named entity recognition, it's called, where they can look at a fax, figure out which is the patient name versus the doctor name versus the referral name versus all that. What's the date of birth? How do I find other identifiers of that patient and ensure that this is going to match for this patient? And then we always keep a human in the loop, even if it's just to validate that, yes, we've got this information right. We're going to highlight the areas of the fax where we're extracting information. But that takes something that used to be a few minutes down to a few seconds. And so those advances are the things that we're delivering that save tremendous time. But the one I'm most excited about is our AI scribe technology. And I know you've done other podcasts and met other people that are excited about ambient listening and what it can do for healthcare. I'll tell you right now, our approach is so different than what I've seen is everyone else is doing, which is everyone else is taking a transcript, because you got to get the voice to the text.
Sure.
And they're using large language models to summarize, classify, regurgitate, so do some magic. And then they're sticking the unstructured text into the EHR. And then maybe they are trying to extract more information like a prescription or a lab or something from that summarization. And that's not our approach. Like, what we're doing, fundamentally different, and it's based on our unfair advantage.
So what's fundamentally different? I mean, give me some more. I always thought it was interesting, even your touch-based system, because you were essentially classifying all of the data into granular data elements. So my guess is it has to be that. But
yeah, right. So fast forward to over 600 million structured data encounters later, where that's not an unstructured block of text that I can't do anything with, but I know precisely the diagnosis. I know precisely the history, the medications, the allergies. I know precisely the treatment and the body location and the scalpel size and the suture size and the MD. I know all of it, all the way down to the most granular thing, because that's how we had built our adaptive learning before. But now fast forward in time to where I have hundreds of millions of ground truth examples of here's what exactly happens in these clinical settings. And I don't have to use language models to reverse engineer what happened. I know exactly what happened. So the trick is to use the data you have, which we had the foresight when we started the company to get secondary use rights on the de-identified data. And let me make sure that's crystal clear to anyone listening. Like, this data is fully de-identified. And so we don't need to know, we don't want to know anything about the patient specifically. We just want to know what happened. We want to know what was prescribed. We want to know the surgical procedure. We want to know the counseling, but we don't need to know anything about the patient, him or her, or themselves. And so we can use that data to train models that then listen for the right vocabulary. So we're doing custom language models for transcription. We're then using these true ground truth outcomes to train an AI scribe that can go from a transcript to the ground truth structured data. And nobody else can do that because they don't have the hundreds of millions of encounters in the rearview mirror to do it with. And they don't have the structured data system to be able to take that data as the endpoint for your AI. That's what defines whether you got it right or wrong when you're doing your training set. You take some of it out, that becomes your validation, and voila, you put it together and you've trained. So our neural nets are trained on specialty-specific data that we've been collecting for years. And the other thing about structured data that's so different is it does things. Like our structured data will automate suggested codes. So all of the ICD-10 codes, no one has to tell it an ICD-10 code. It knows if that's the disease and it's here on your body, here's the ICD-10 code. It knows procedure codes. It knows modifier codes. It knows how to put things into workflow. It knows prescriptions, including your usual SIG. So it knows your typically prescribed strength and dose and route and frequency. And so it can use all the information it knows about you, the provider, all the information it knows about that patient, including historical context, and then everything it just heard from a transcript to create an unbelievably rich structured data experience that the doctor still picks up the iPad at the end of the conversation, and they're just reconciling it. They're just reviewing it. You know, here's what was said. Here's how the iPad heard and interpreted it. And based on everything it knows about what I've done in the past and what I'm doing right now, here's what the plan of action it's taking is. And then I simply accept or reject, make any changes, and then I'm done. So the whole idea here is to take an already powerful adaptive touch-based iPad learning system and use on the chip, like the new iPads have this new M4 chip that's just ridiculous. And so we're trying to take full advantage of the hardware to do as much of the model as we can forward on the chip, because then you get really, really fast recognition as you're speaking. It's filling it in, it's making the changes. So we're trying to take advantage of that Apple neural network on the iPad, and then forwarding us what gets completed at the end. So here's the finalized structured information, and we don't even want the recording. Like, we think recordings can be kind of dangerous or potential liabilities. So we want the structured data at the end of it, not all the intermediary things that got you to what you signed into your document. And that I think is another potential pitfall of ambient listening that's not done on the device, is that you're creating potentially bad artifacts in your cloud, right? Either an audio file of everything that took place in that exam room, or you're creating a full transcript of everything that was said. And maybe that's good for you in your practice if someone comes asking, or maybe that's something you don't want. And most doctors I've met want what's signed into the record to be the record, not all these other sort of intermediary products, because unfortunately this can be a little litigious.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? The recording could save you or it could damn you, right? Like, I think that's the the challenge that I think many see with that, right? Ironically, I wrote about the video EHR about 14 years ago, with that exact point, right? Will they be okay with it, right? And so we're going to have those discussions about privacy. I think what's interesting, though, to differentiate, you describe how you're fundamentally doing it differently. But I think what you described was you're fundamentally doing it differently on the back end. But the front end, is it fundamentally the same, where they open up the thing, they start the recording, they get consent from the patient, and then the note's created? In that regard, you're essentially the same, or would you say different?
Everything except that the note is created. So our system is collecting structured data, and the structured data creates the note and the bill for the encounter form and the prescriptions in the lab. So we aren't creating a SOAP note. A SOAP note is a derivative of structured data. It's actually a lossy version of the structured data. With structured data, you can have rich workflows, you can have rich, all sorts of routing. You can do really intelligent things when you know a biopsy is something you're going to have to track in a cancer log and are expecting a result from, versus just an unstructured SOAP note that I've, verbally taken, compressed, and stuck somewhere. So it's the same in that there's a device in the room that's listening. In our case, we're doing a lot of the transcription on device, which I think is a big differentiator. But more importantly, our output is structured data, whereas everything I've seen's output so far that's not us is unstructured blocks of data.
Interesting. And, I think it's safe to assume that you're doing this all in-house because you can't really white label the integration with all your backend data. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. Yeah, and look, we're experts on structured data systems. We've got at this point trillions and trillions of clinical data in our cloud environment. And so we're pretty good at figuring out how to use this data to not only train models, but how to make them highly effective and highly resourceful. The other thing about structured data is it finds gaps in your data for you. So one of the things we've seen in the real world is people that aren't used to a verbal, like ambient conversation for recording information use words like there or does this hurt and lift your left arm. Like they don't say, I'm going to now lift your left arm for a range of motion. And so the software can't see. And so it doesn't know where there is. And so you need to, as the doctor, verbalize like what they're seeing, where they're seeing it on the anatomy. That's something that in the initial days when we were collecting recordings, we had to go back and retrain people and say, good job on counseling. That's what they do a great job on. But when you're describing the disease, and it's okay to use synonyms, you don't have to say, I'm going to use liquid nitrogen to freeze that. That might scare somebody. You can say, oh, I'm just going to freeze that, AK. That's totally fine. We can make, the AI model understand what that is or what it isn't. But you still need to verbalize where you're doing it on the anatomy. The thing our system also is really good at catching is prescription gaps. So they'll say like, oh, we'll prescribe you some, minocycline. They don't say a strength, a dose, a frequency. And so then when they pick up the iPad, it's going to be highlighted what strength, what dose, what frequency, and it'll teach them that if they don't verbalize it, no problem, but then they're going to have 3 touches, one for strength, one for dose, one for frequency. Whereas if they say, I want to prescribe you, minocycline 250, you'll take it 2 times a day, like then the system picks up on all of it. So structured data becomes a safety net where, you can't just say, ooh, that lesion looks strange, I'm going to biopsy it. You have to say where on the body it is. You've got to describe the lesion. It's pigmented, it's itchy, whatever it is. You have to describe the dimensions of it. So it actually ends up becoming a more educated both patient and doctor experience, and it leads to less clicks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in your announcement about some of the AI efforts you're doing, you highlighted a few other areas. One was AI-assisted patient collaboration. What are you doing there?
So for patient collaboration, we're using our system called Clara, which is our patient engagement tool. And the beautiful thing about Clara is it's asynchronous, right? It's a chat tool. It's available on their mobile devices. It doesn't have to be iOS. And they're able to collaborate with the practice for scheduling, for billing, for clinical related questions. And it turns out a lot of their questions, the AI can handle itself. They're related to something that's very straightforward. Like, I want to pay my bill. It brings up the credit card processing form. They enter their information and it's secure. And we can now allocate that payment directly in the ledger. Other times, it's more clinically related. And so the AI is doing a few things in the background. It's answering what it can answer on its own and what it's trained to answer. Anything it isn't trained to answer, it looks at the context of the conversation and it knows which cue in the practice to put it in. So while the patient might think I'm having a direct conversation with my physician, chances are it went into a queue for front office, back office billing, clinical queue, and someone, it might be them, but someone then is answering their questions about it. And it could be routed to the physician, but these are more Slack-like, if you use Slack as an application where multiple people can be on the conversation thread at the same time. And that's really helpful for managing a very complex medical practice. So we're using AI for classification and for routing and for answering questions that it's been informed that it's allowed to answer. We do not let our AIs go off and hallucinate. While these types of AI, the language model ones, do have incredibly powerful large language models behind them that could theoretically answer questions about almost anything. It turns out they tend to make stuff up based on things they've seen in the past that may or may not be relevant to the patient and doctor experience in front of them.
Interesting. How about AI assisted claims processing? I think it's interesting you're in the RCM business as well, but that's a big evolution. But what are you doing with claims processing in AI?
It's a great area to be in, because if we weren't in the revenue cycle management business, I don't think we would necessarily feel the same type of pain that our customers feel when they are trying to work their own claims and get paid. So we've got an incredible 97% plus first time claims pass rate, which is great. So we're industry leading on getting stuff through. But the trick is, which 3% are going to get denied? And AI is really good at looking at patterns and helping identify things that are on both sides of the equation. One, help me identify the things that you know are going to be clean, so I don't even have to open them and look at them. I just know that based on that collection of these CPT codes, these ICD-10 codes at that payer, fire and forget. Don't even review them. And then we also, on the other side, can identify ones that, if we know something is bad, hopefully our claim scrubber saw it even before our AI got to it. But if our AI is like, you just flag this as potentially something which, could be denied, and here are the predicted denial code reasons. So it's just predictive analytics. It's not rocket science. It's a great use for AI. So that way we're saying, this batch, don't even worry about fire and forget, you're going to get paid. This batch is where you want to spend your time looking at it and seeing if there's anything you want to do to preempt a potential denial. And then there's a whole bunch of AI being built as we speak to actually help process denials, because a lot of denial management is fairly straightforward. It's pulling information from different sources. It's, drafting a denial response and appeal, and then filing that. Again, things that AI is pretty good at doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mentioned I want to go back to the UI idea. When we first met at that random M Health conference, that's a fun term, M Health these days. And you demoed. I still think it's probably the best demo I've ever seen. It's in my top 10 demos I've ever seen. When you showed the iPad and you touched a document in the EHR, I would say your innovation was around the UI, the
Yes.
touch base, and also kind of standardized data in the back.
Yes.
What do you think the UI of the future is going to look like for doctors? And how about the use of that data as well?
So two very good, very different questions. What does the UI look like for doctors in the future? Hopefully they don't even have to see it except to sign off on it and go on to the next patient, right? The best UI is one you don't have to see. So I'm a huge, huge proponent of ambient listening. And then the doctors are very good at visually scanning that information, confirming it's right, and signing it and moving on. And I want that one user interface to do everything they need, from it's going to document their note, and it's going to do their billing, and it's going to show them their quality measure calculation, and it's going to have their path requisition and patient education and all of it, because again, it's structured data. And I have not seen another EHR quite like that. So we're
Do
going
you
to
think
go.
it will become a true AI assistant where they say, show me the last 3 lab results and things like that as well?
Absolutely. Pulling up information, recalling information, I think is going to be big. I like to play around in my geek mode with my, Apple Vision Pro goggles, and it's not always going to look like this big bulky thing, but we certainly are looking far into the future for how mixed reality and augmented reality are going to help in healthcare to pull up information. I think those are great uses in healthcare. Where again, I get worried is I don't want to try to build AI that's going to out-doctor a doctor. And so I get nervous when people are like, Dan, how easy would it be for you to summarize the last 3 encounters? I'm not a doctor, so I'm not exactly sure what's the most important things I need to summarize and what I might leave out. So we're leery of getting into like clinical summarization, like faxing inbound things and classifying them, no problem, right? But trying to actually interpret in one of these 72-page Epic faxes that our doctors get, I'm not nagging Epic, like they document the hell out of everything, but there might be a sentence in there on page 42, which is like critical on, is this patient strep positive or something? And I don't want the liability for having to figure that out, just sort of getting shifted around to different people. Like, I think all the EHRs are incumbent on making sure the best information, the most important information is surfaced and not buried. And if it gets to that point and we know like this is the critical information, even better, if we get to the point where it's not a fax and it's, a USCDI or a CCD or something where it's clinical and it's structured data, then I'll feel a whole lot better about creating summaries and things. But when it's unstructured and I'm supposed to quasi-structure it, I get real nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at, a lot of people have said data is the new gas, or like, and to some degree it is, right? It's powering a lot of what's possible, but
All of our AI models, absolutely.
yeah, not all data is created equal though, and I think that's what we're going to really find out.
It's quality and quantity. I think that the next thing the FDA or DOJ, I don't know who's going to ask it, is going to be like, great, you're using AI models in healthcare. FDA is responsible for regulating devices in healthcare. And they're going to ask 2 or 3 really good questions, like, what is the source of your data? And how did you train it? And is it free from bias? Or if so, tell me about and disclose your patient population so that we can understand bias. And if you are sitting on top of someone else's large language model, good luck trying to explain what it was trained on and how they trained it, because even they're not telling anybody. So
Sure.
I'm leery that the LLM-based systems hallucinate, even when you instruct them not to. They can't but help themselves because they've been built up from ingesting the internets. Like, they've just ingested everything possible. And then people are fine-tuning the very last layer to be very healthcare specific. But it can't help but know all the other layers of information based on top of it. And you've seen 100 examples of, even when you try to put guardrails on these things, you can get information out of them that they're not supposed to leak. And so I think a lot of the companies are getting better at trying to put more fingers in the dam to hold it back. But you have to know your data. And if you can't start with, well, let me tell you exactly what's in the model, you're never going to win that fight.
Yeah. I always like to tell people it's not a hallucination. Someone actually said it. That's where it comes from.
Right or wrong. And I was looking at these models earlier, and I'm like, it's interesting. And in some cases, it's not wrong. Like, that is good counseling.
Yeah, and it can be powerful.
But that's not what was talked about. And so to have a conversation with a patient, and then my note says, I counseled the patient on a whole bunch of things we didn't do, that can be, misleading at worst, dangerous, also. Like, if it starts to think that, well, I've seen a lot of people prescribe this drug, maybe we should prescribe that drug. So, and I know there's safety nets on EHRs, and I don't think other EHRs will be found guilty of like misprescribing and mislab ordering, because their systems are built in a way that those things are sort of disaggregated anyway, and you kind of have to go through the system. And because it's not all one smooth thing, that creates safety, because they have to go somewhere to prescribe and go somewhere else to lab and do all those other things. But I do worry. I lose sleep on AI getting a bad rap in healthcare before good AI has an opportunity to show what it can do.
Interesting. Well, and luckily it's Copilot for now, because they want to leave the liability on the doctor. That's my take, not yours. But Dan, it's always a pleasure talking with you and hearing your perspectives. You're always so thoughtful as you approach the use of technology in healthcare and being able to benefit your users. So thanks so much, and thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting applications. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, John.